The cold metal walls of the research station hummed with a low vibration that Amy Carter had grown used to over the past 3 weeks. She pressed her face against the observation window and watched the blue-green planet Kepler 442b slowly turn below them. The swirling clouds looked peaceful from up here, but she knew the surface was a hostile world of acid rain and poisonous gases. Amy wiped her sweaty palms on her uniform jacket and checked her datapad for the 5th time in 10 minutes. The Zephyrian delegation would arrive in less than an hour. She had studied their species for months, memorized their customs, and practiced the proper greeting gestures until her arms ached. But nothing could prepare her for actually meeting them face to face. "Stop looking so nervous," said Commander Jake Morrison as he walked up beside her. His gray hair was perfectly combed and his dress uniform was spotless. Jake had been a diplomat for 20 years and had met with dozens of alien species. To him, this was just another day at work. "I can't help it," Amy said. "What if I mess something up? What if I say the wrong thing or use the wrong hand gesture?" "You'll be fine," said Lieutenant Sophie Hayes from across the room. She was checking her sidearm for the 3rd time, making sure everything was in perfect working order. Sophie never looked nervous about anything, but Amy noticed she had been extra careful with her weapons today. The 3 humans were alone in the dining hall that had been set up for the meeting. The long metal table was covered with a white cloth and set with the finest dishes they could find on the station. In the center sat a beautiful crystal chalice filled with Zephyrian nectar, a rare drink that had cost more than Amy's yearly salary. "Remember," Jake said, "this is just a cultural exchange dinner, nothing formal. We eat, we talk, we learn about each other. The real negotiations don't start until tomorrow." Amy nodded and tried to calm her racing heart. She had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl reading about alien life in her bedroom back in Ohio. Now she was actually going to sit down and have dinner with beings from another world. The door hissed open, and Captain Rodriguez stepped inside. "They're here," he said simply. Amy's breath caught in her throat as the first Zephyrian entered the room. General Vexitar was even taller than she had imagined, standing nearly 8 feet high with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. His skin was a deep purple color with darker stripes running down his arms and neck. But what struck Amy most were his forearms, each one as thick as her waist and ending in hands with long, sharp claws. Behind him came Sub-Commander Krillax, slightly smaller but still towering over the humans. Both aliens wore military uniforms covered in medals and rank symbols that Amy didn't recognize. General Vextar's 4 eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. When his gaze fell on Amy, she felt like a mouse being studied by a hawk. She managed a small bow the way she had practiced, but her hands were shaking. "Welcome to Research Station Omega," Jake said in his most diplomatic voice. "We are honored by your presence." The translation device on the table flickered to life, converting Jake's words into the clicking, whistling sounds of the Zephyrian language. General Vextar replied with a series of sharp clicks that the machine translated as, "We come in the spirit of understanding, though we do not expect much from this meeting." Amy felt her face flush. Even through the translation, she could hear the contempt in his voice. The Zephyrians clearly didn't think much of humans. They all took their seats around the table. Amy found herself sitting directly across from General Vextar, which made her even more nervous. His 4 eyes never stopped moving, watching everything the humans did. The dinner began quietly. Human food had been prepared alongside Zephyrian dishes, though Amy couldn't identify most of what was on the alien plates. The smell was strange, like burning metal mixed with flowers. She tried to eat normally, but every bite felt like chewing cardboard. "Your species is smaller than our reports indicated," General Vextar said suddenly. His voice was deep and rough like rocks grinding together. "Are you certain you are fully grown adults?" Jake smiled politely. "Humans come in many different sizes, General. Dr. Carter here may be small, but she has one of the finest minds in xenobiology." Amy felt her cheeks burn red. She had always been shorter than average, barely reaching 5 feet 3 inches, and she hated when people pointed it out, but she forced herself to smile and nod. Xenobiology, the general repeated as if the word tasted bad. The study of alien life forms. How amusing that such a tiny creature thinks she can understand beings like us. Sub-Commander Krillax made a sound that might have been laughter. Amy's hands clenched under the table, but she kept her expression neutral. Dr. Carter has made significant discoveries about plant life on 17 different worlds, Sophie said, her voice cold. Her work has saved countless lives by identifying which alien plants are safe to eat and which are poisonous. General Vextar's 4 eyes fixed on Amy again. Plants, he said dismissively. Not exactly the same as understanding a warrior species, is it? Amy felt anger building in her chest, but she pushed it down. This was too important to let her emotions get in the way. I find that all life forms have something to teach us, General. Even the smallest flower can show us how to survive in impossible conditions. The general leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his massive weight. Survival, he said. Yes, I suppose your species knows something about that. We have studied your history. Constant warfare, killing each other over resources, territory, beliefs. Very primitive but effective. Jake's smile became strained. Humans have moved beyond our violent past, General. We now solve conflicts through diplomacy and cooperation. Have you? General Vextar picked up a piece of food with one of his hands while using another to gesture. Then why do you carry weapons to a dinner party? Sophie's hand moved slightly toward her sidearm before she caught herself. Standard security procedures, General. Nothing more. Amy decided to change the subject before things got worse. She reached for her datapad, which was sitting near the edge of the table. Her sleeve caught the crystal chalice as she moved, and everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The chalice tipped over, spilling the precious Zephyrian nectar across the white tablecloth. The purple liquid spread quickly, staining everything it touched. Amy gasped and tried to catch the chalice, but it was too late. The room fell completely silent. Amy looked up to see General Vextar staring at the spilled nectar, his 4 eyes, wide with what looked like rage. Sub-Commander Krillax had gone completely still, his hand moving toward his weapon. I'm so sorry, Amy said quickly. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. Accident? General Vextar's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a deadly edge. That nectar is sacred to my people. It takes 50 years to produce a single cup. It is given only to honor the greatest warriors. Amy felt the blood drain from her face. General, please, I truly didn't mean any disrespect. If there's any way I can make this right. The general stood up slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow over the table. All 4 of his hands were clenched into fists, and Amy could see his claws extending from his fingertips. You humans, he snarled, are exactly what I expected. Clumsy, disrespectful, and completely worthless. Jake started to stand. General, surely we can discuss this calmly. But General Vextar wasn't listening. His rage had taken over completely. In one swift motion, he leaned across the table and struck Amy across the face with the back of his massive hand. The blow sent Amy flying from her chair. She hit the floor hard, her cheek already swelling and bleeding from 4 parallel cuts, left by his claws. The room spun around her as she struggled to focus. For a moment, nobody moved. General Vextar stood over her, breathing heavily, apparently satisfied that he had put the small human in her place. Sub-Commander Krillax watched, with approval. Jake and Sophie were frozen in shock. Amy lay on the cold metal floor, tasting blood in her mouth and feeling the sting of the cuts on her face. But instead of fear or pain, something else was building inside her. Something hot and dangerous that she had never felt before. She looked up at the towering alien who had just struck her, and something inside her snapped. Amy lay on the cold floor for exactly 1 second. Blood dripped from the 4 claw marks on her cheek, and her head was spinning from the impact. But as she stared up at General Vextar's satisfied expression, something deep inside her awakened. It wasn't anger, though anger was part of it. It wasn't fear, though she should have been terrified. It was something older and more primitive. Something that her ancestors had carried when they fought wild animals with nothing but their bare hands. Something that had helped humans survive on a hostile planet for millions of years. General Vextar looked down at her with all 4 eyes, clearly expecting her to stay down like a beaten animal. He had struck many beings in his long military career, and they all reacted the same way. They cowered, they begged, or they ran away. None of them ever got back up. But Amy Carter was not like any being he had ever met. Commander Jake Morrison was reaching for his sidearm, but he was sitting 3 feet away and would need at least 2 seconds to draw and aim. Lieutenant Sophie Hayes was already starting to rise from her chair, her training kicking in, but she was trapped behind the table and would need time to get into position. Sub-Commander Krillax was smiling, enjoying the sight of the small human on the floor. He had his hand resting on his plasma weapon but wasn't worried about any threat from such a tiny creature. None of them understood what was about to happen. Amy's mind was working faster than it ever had before. Years of self-defense classes from college came flooding back to her. Her instructor had been a former Marine who taught his students that size didn't matter if you knew where to hit and how to move. The bigger they are, he used to say, the harder they fall. General Vextar was standing over her with his weight distributed poorly across his forelegs. He was leaning forward slightly, all 4 hands at his sides completely relaxed because he thought the fight was over. His primary knee joint was exposed and only 2 feet from where Amy lay. Amy had studied Zephyrian anatomy for months. She knew their knee joints were surprisingly delicate compared to the rest of their massive bodies. She knew they had a nerve cluster just below their chest that was similar to a human solar plexus. She knew that despite their size and strength, they had the same basic weaknesses as any bipedal creature. Most importantly, she knew they would never expect an attack from someone they had just knocked down. Time seemed to slow as Amy made her decision. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could see a drop of her blood hitting the metal floor. She could smell the alien food and the metallic scent of the spilled nectar. Amy swept her right leg in a wide arc, using a move she had practiced hundreds of times on practice mats. Her shin connected with the back of General Vextar's primary knee joint with all the force her human muscles could generate. The general's eyes went wide with shock and pain. His massive leg buckled immediately and he started to fall forward. But Amy wasn't finished. As the 8-foot alien toppled toward her, Amy rolled to her left and sprang to her feet with the fluid grace of a gymnast. General Vextar was off balance, his forearms flailing as he tried to catch himself. His broad chest was completely exposed. Amy drove her elbow upward with every ounce of strength in her small body. Human bones were denser than most alien species realized. Human muscles could generate tremendous force in short bursts, and Amy had the advantage of perfect timing and positioning. Her elbow struck the nerve cluster below General Vextar's chest with surgical precision. The impact sent shock waves through his massive body, disrupting his nervous system and making it impossible for him to breathe properly. The general made a sound like air being let out of a balloon. His 4 eyes rolled back in his head and his secondary arms began to spasm uncontrollably. All 400 pounds of alien warrior crashed to the floor like a falling tree. The entire exchange took exactly 3 seconds. Amy stood over the fallen general, breathing hard and wiping blood from her cheek. Her heart was racing, but her mind was perfectly clear. She could hardly believe what she had just done. General Vextar lay on his back, gasping like a fish out of water. His primary arms were clutching his chest while his secondary arms twitched helplessly. He was trying to speak, but only wheezing sounds came out. Sub-Commander Krillax stared in complete shock for a moment before reaching for his plasma weapon, but he found himself looking down the barrels of 3 human sidearms. Jake and Sophie had both drawn their weapons with lightning speed, and even Captain Rodriguez had appeared in the doorway with his gun ready. "I wouldn't," Sophie said quietly. Her voice was steady, but there was steel in it that made the alien freeze. Outside, the dining hall, Amy could hear running footsteps and shouting voices. The Zephyrian honor guard was mobilizing, probably thinking their general was under attack. Human security teams were responding as well, and she could hear the distinctive sound of blast doors sealing throughout the station. But General Vextar raised one of his primary hands in a shaking gesture that made Sub-Commander Krillax step back from his weapon. Amy didn't understand the movement, but it was clearly some kind of command. The general was still struggling to breathe, but he managed to push himself up on his elbows. He stared at Amy with all four eyes, and she could see something had changed in his expression. The arrogance was gone, the contempt had disappeared. Instead, there was something that looked almost like respect. "Impossible," he wheezed in his own language. The translation device picked up the word and spoke it in English. Amy wiped more blood from her face and looked down at the alien who had struck her. A part of her wanted to leave him on the floor where he belonged. But another part of her, the part that had studied healing plants and dedicated her life to understanding other forms of life, couldn't walk away from a being in pain. She knelt down beside General Vextar and offered him her hand. "Are you hurt?" she asked. The general stared at her extended hand as if it were a poisonous snake. Sub-Commander Krillax made a sound of disbelief. Even Jake and Sophie looked surprised. "You help me," General Vextar managed to say in broken English. After you hit me," Amy finished. "Yes, that's what humans do." She helped the massive alien sit up, though it took considerable effort given his size and weight. He was still breathing heavily, but the spasms in his secondary arms had stopped. General Vextar looked at Amy as if seeing her for the first time. This small bleeding human had just knocked him down in 3 seconds and was now helping him recover. Nothing in his military training or cultural background had prepared him for such a thing. "Your species," he said slowly, "is not what we expected." Amy sat back on her heels and looked at him seriously. "No, I don't think we are." The standoff continued for several more minutes. Human and Zephyrian security forces faced each other through the sealed blast doors, weapons ready but neither side willing to make the first move. Inside the dining hall, the two groups watched each other carefully. Finally, General Vextar managed to get to his feet with Amy's help. He was unsteady, but his breathing was returning to normal. He looked around the room, taking in the drawn weapons, the spilled nectar, and the small human who had just taught him something impossible. "Sub-Commander," he said in his own language, "stand down." Krillax looked confused. "General, she attacked you. We must respond." "She defended herself," General Vextar corrected. "There is a difference." He turned to Amy, who was still bleeding from the cuts on her face but standing straight and tall despite everything that had happened. "Dr. Carter," he said carefully, "I believe we need to talk." The next 3 hours were the longest of Amy's life. She sat in the medical bay while Dr. Kim cleaned and treated the cuts on her face, but her mind was focused on the conference room down the hall where General Vextar was meeting with Commander Morrison and the station's senior staff. "Hold still," Dr. Kim said as she applied the last bandage. "These cuts are deeper than they look. You're lucky he didn't hit you any harder." Amy touched the bandages gently. The Zephyrian general's claws had left 4 parallel lines from her left ear to the corner of her mouth. They would heal, but she would carry the scars for the rest of her life. "How is he?" Amy asked. She had been wondering about General Vextar's condition since the incident. "Physically, he's fine," Dr. Kim said. "You didn't cause any permanent damage, but he's been asking to speak with you." Amy wasn't sure she was ready for that conversation. Everything had happened so fast. One moment she was trying to be a good diplomat, and the next she was fighting for her life against an 8-foot alien warrior. She still couldn't believe she had won. Lieutenant Sophie Hayes entered the medical bay and sat down beside Amy. "The general wants to talk," she said, "but you don't have to if you're not ready." "What's he been saying in there?" Amy asked. Sophie looked puzzled. "That's the strange part. He's been asking questions about human anatomy and physiology. He wants to know how strong we are, how fast we can move, how our joints work. It's like he's trying to understand what happened." Amy thought about this. In those 3 seconds, she had done something that General Vextar clearly thought was impossible. She had knocked down a being 3 times her size and weight. From his perspective, it probably seemed like magic. "He also keeps talking about something he calls the mercy paradox," Sophie continued. "He can't understand why you helped him after he attacked you." Amy stood up and looked at herself in the mirror. The bandages covered most of the left side of her face, but her right eye was already starting to turn purple. She looked like she had been in a fight which she supposed she had. "I want to talk to him," she said finally. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? After what he did to you?" Amy touched her bandages again. "If we're going to work together, we need to understand each other. And right now I think I'm the only human he's interested in understanding." They walked down the corridor together, passing windows that showed the vast emptiness of space. Amy had always found the stars comforting, but today they seemed cold and distant. She was about to have a conversation that could change the future of human-alien relations, and she had no idea what to say. The conference room door slid open to reveal General Vextar sitting alone at the large table. He looked up as Amy entered, and she saw something in his four eyes that hadn't been there before. It might have been respect, or it might have been fear. Maybe both. "Dr. Carter," he said, standing up carefully. His movement was still a bit stiff from their encounter. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Amy sat down across from him, the same position they had been in during dinner. But everything felt different now. "You wanted to understand what happened," she said simply. General Vextar's forehands rested on the table, his claws retracted. "In my military career, I have fought beings from 17 different species. I have commanded armies and conquered worlds. But I have never experienced anything like what you did to me." Amy studied his face, trying to read his expression. "What did you think of humans before today?" "We thought you were weak," he said honestly. "Small, soft, fragile. Your species has no natural weapons, no armor, no obvious strengths. We assumed you had survived through luck and cunning, not through any real ability to fight. And now," General Vexatar leaned back in his chair, "now I am not sure what to think. You are still small and soft and fragile, but you moved like a trained warrior. You struck with precision and power. You knew exactly where to hit me and how to bring me down." Amy shook her head. "I'm not a warrior, General. I'm a scientist who took some self-defense classes in college. What I did was just basic human survival instinct." "Basic?" General Vextar's four eyes widened. "You defeated a Zephyrian general in single combat using basic instincts?" "I got lucky," Amy said. "You weren't expecting me to fight back, so I had the advantage of surprise." The general was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Tell me about these self-defense classes," he said finally. Amy spent the next hour explaining human martial arts and combat training. She told him about how human children learn to fight and defend themselves, how they're military-trained soldiers, how their police and security forces operated. General Vextar listened to every word, occasionally asking questions that showed just how little his species understood about human capabilities. "Your bone density," he said at one point, "is 3 times greater than ours. Your muscle fibers can generate tremendous force in short bursts. Your joints can move in ways that seem impossible. How did we not know this?" "Did you ever ask?" Amy replied. "Or did you just assume we were weak because we're smaller than you?" General Vextar looked uncomfortable. "We studied your history, your wars, your technology. We saw a species that fought constantly among themselves over resources and territory. We concluded that you were primitive and violent, but not particularly dangerous to us." "We are violent," Amy admitted, "but we're also capable of incredible kindness and cooperation. That's what you don't understand about the mercy paradox." "Explain this to me," the general said, leaning forward. Amy thought carefully about how to put it into words. "When you hit me, every instinct I had told me to fight back. But once you were down, those same instincts told me to help you. Humans don't just fight to win. We fight to protect, to survive, to make things better. When the fight is over, the anger goes away." General Vextar shook his head. "This makes no sense. In Zephyrian culture, if someone attacks you, they become your enemy forever. You defeat them completely or they defeat you. There is no middle ground. That's why you've been fighting wars for thousands of years," Amy said quietly. "And why humans have started moving past our violent phase. We learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is help your enemy." The general stared at her for a long time. "You are not what we expected," he said finally. "Any of you. Commander Morrison has been showing me reports of human settlements, human exploration missions, human scientific achievements. Your species spreads across the galaxy not by conquest but by cooperation. You make friends with other species instead of enslaving them." Amy nodded. "We've learned that working together is more effective than fighting alone." "But you can fight," General Vextar said. "When you need to, you can be as dangerous as any warrior species." "When we have to be," Amy agreed. "But we'd rather not." The general stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars with his 4 eyes. "My people have built an empire through strength and fear. We are respected because others know we will crush anyone who opposes us. But we have few true allies and even fewer friends." Amy joined him at the window. "It doesn't have to stay that way." General Vextar looked down at her. The bandages on her face were a reminder of how their relationship had started, but somehow they had moved far beyond that moment. "Dr. Carter," he said, "I believe you have given me much to think about. But I have one more question." "What's that?" "If other species learn what I learned today about human capabilities, how do you think they will react?" Amy considered this carefully. The general was right to be concerned. If news of this incident spread throughout the galaxy, other alien species might see humans as a threat instead of potential allies. "I think," she said slowly, "that depends on how the story gets told." Outside the window, stars continued their ancient dance across the void, unaware that the balance of power in their corner of the galaxy had just shifted in the span of 3 seconds. 6 weeks later, Amy Carter stood in front of a mirror in her new quarters on Earth, looking at the faint scars on her cheek. The cuts had healed well, leaving only thin white lines that were barely visible unless you knew where to look. But everyone in human space knew where to look now. The story had spread like wildfire through both human and alien communication networks. Within days of the incident at Research Station Omega, every major news service in the galaxy was running some version of the tale. But as Amy had feared, the story changed each time it was told. In human space, the reports were fairly accurate. Amy was described as a young scientist who had defended herself against an unprovoked attack. Some news services called her a hero, others focused on the diplomatic breakthrough that followed. The Earth government had offered her a dozen different promotions and medals, all of which she had politely declined. But in alien space, the story had grown into something much larger and more frightening. Amy's assistant knocked on her door and entered with a stack of data pads. "The morning reports, Dr. Carter," said Lisa Park, a young communications officer who had been assigned to help Amy deal with her sudden fame. "What are they saying today?" Amy asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Lisa activated the first data pad and began reading. "The Vex Consortium News Network is calling you the human weapon and claiming that Earth has been secretly training super soldiers for decades. The Malari Collective thinks humans are a warrior species that has been hiding their true nature. And the Ethereal Unity has issued a statement saying that all human diplomats should be considered potential threats." Amy sighed and sat down at her desk. Through her window, she could see the Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon. It was good to be back on Earth after weeks of debriefings and meetings, but the view couldn't distract her from what was happening across the galaxy. "There's more," Lisa continued. 3 alien species have requested military consultations with human forces. They want to know if we would be willing to help them train their own soldiers. And 5 other species have canceled planned diplomatic meetings. Amy rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. "What about the Zephyrians?" "That's the interesting part," Lisa said, activating another data pad. "General Vextar has been giving speeches throughout Zephyrian space. He's calling humans the paradox species and advocating for closer cooperation with Earth." Amy looked up in surprise. "Really?" Lisa nodded. "According to our intelligence sources, he's been very persuasive. The Zephyrian High Command is apparently reconsidering their entire foreign policy because of what happened between you two." A communication alert chimed on Amy's desk. The caller ID showed that it was Commander Morrison calling from the diplomatic facility on Luna. Amy activated the screen and saw Jake's familiar face appear. "Amy," he said, "we need you back up here. The situation is getting complicated." "More complicated than alien species thinking we're secretly super soldiers?" Amy asked. Jake's expression was grim. "The Galactic Council has called an emergency session. They want to discuss the human question and determine whether our species poses a threat to galactic peace." Amy felt her stomach drop. The Galactic Council was a loose alliance of the oldest and most powerful alien civilizations. They rarely interfered in the affairs of younger species, but when they did, entire worlds could be quarantined or even destroyed. "When is the session?" she asked. "In 3 days. And Amy, they've specifically requested that you attend as Earth's representative." Amy stared at the screen in disbelief. "Me? Jake, I'm not a diplomat. I'm a botanist who got into one fight." "That's exactly why they want you there," Jake said. "You're the human who fought General Vextar and lived to tell about it. To them, you represent what our species is capable of." After the call ended, Amy sat alone in her quarters thinking about how her life had changed so dramatically. 6 weeks ago, she had been an unknown scientist studying alien plant life. Now she was being asked to represent humanity before the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Her door chimed again, and Amy was surprised to see Captain Rodriguez enter. The station commander looked older than she remembered, and there were new lines of stress around his eyes. "Dr. Carter," he said, "I wanted to speak with you before you leave for the council meeting." Amy gestured for him to sit down. "What's on your mind, Captain?" Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair. "I've been getting reports from our intelligence network. The story of your fight with General Vextar has reached species we've never even heard of. Some of them are sending scouts toward human space, trying to evaluate whether we're a threat." "And what are they concluding?" Amy asked. "That depends on which version of the story they hear," Rodriguez said. "Some think you're a specially trained super soldier. Others believe all humans have hidden combat abilities. A few have decided that we're a deceptively peaceful species that could be dangerous if provoked." Amy stood up and walked to her window. "What do you think will happen at the council meeting?" Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I think they're going to try to limit human expansion into space. Maybe establish quotas on how many humans can live on alien worlds, or require special permits for human travelers. At worst, they might try to quarantine our entire species." The thought made Amy feel sick. Humanity had just begun to explore the galaxy and make contact with other intelligent life. The idea that her actions might cut short that incredible journey was almost too much to bear. "There is one piece of good news," Rodriguez continued. "General Vextar has requested permission to attend the council meeting as a character witness for humanity." Amy turned around in surprise. "He's going to defend us?" "According to our sources, yes. He's been studying human culture and history for the past 6 weeks. Apparently, he's become quite an advocate for our species." 3 days later, Amy found herself aboard a diplomatic transport heading for the Galactic Council's meeting station in the Centauri system. She had spent the journey reviewing everything she knew about the council members and practicing the speech she might never get to give. The council station was unlike anything Amy had ever seen. It was a massive ring-shaped structure that rotated slowly in space, generating artificial gravity for the dozens of different species that worked there. As their transport docked, Amy could see beings that looked like living crystals, others that appeared to be made of pure energy, and creatures so alien that she couldn't even determine which end was the head. General Vextar was waiting for her at the docking bay. He looked different than she remembered, more thoughtful and less intimidating. His military uniform was decorated with new medals that Amy didn't recognize. "Dr. Carter," he said as she approached, "I am honored to see you again." Amy smiled, though she was nervous about the upcoming meeting. "General, I hear you've been speaking on humanity's behalf." "I have been sharing what I learned about your species," he said. "Not everyone has been willing to listen." They walked together through the station's corridors, passing beings from across the galaxy. Amy noticed that many of them stared at her as she passed, and she realized that her face had become famous throughout known space. "General, she said quietly. "What do you think will happen in there?" Vextar stopped walking and looked down at her with his 4 eyes. "Dr. Carter, 6 weeks ago I thought I understood the galaxy and humanity's place in it. I was wrong about almost everything. Today, I suspect the council members are about to discover that they are wrong about many things as well." As they approached the council chamber, Amy could hear the sound of dozens of different alien languages being translated simultaneously. In a few minutes, she would be standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy, trying to explain why humanity deserved a place among the stars. She touched the faint scars on her cheek and wondered if 3 seconds of violence had doomed her species, or if it might somehow save them. The Galactic Council chamber was enormous, with curved walls that seemed to stretch into infinity. Hundreds of alien beings sat in rows that spiraled upward like a vast amphitheater. Amy had never felt so small in her entire life. She sat at a simple table in the center of the chamber, with General Vextar beside her and Commander Morrison representing Earth's government. Around them, beings from across the galaxy watched with eyes, sensors, and organs she couldn't even identify. The council speaker was a creature that looked like a tree made of silver metal. Its voice came from speakers built into the walls, since it communicated through electromagnetic pulses rather than sound. "We gather today to address the human question," the speaker announced. "Recent events have raised concerns about this species and their potential threat to galactic peace." Amy felt her heart racing as murmurs filled the chamber. She could hear dozens of different languages being translated simultaneously, creating a buzzing sound that made her feel dizzy. "The council recognizes Counselor Thresh of the Vex Consortium," the speaker continued. A slug-like being the size of a small car rose from the lower rows. Its voice was wet and bubbling when it spoke. "Honored speaker, the humans have revealed themselves to be a deceptive species. They appear weak and peaceful, but hide dangerous capabilities. One small human female defeated a Zephyrian general in single combat. What other secrets are they hiding from us?" Amy wanted to stand up and object, but General Vextar placed one of his hands gently on her arm to keep her seated. "The council recognizes Counselor Zix of the Ethereal Unity," the speaker said. A being made of pure energy flickered as it spoke. "We have studied the incident in question. The human displayed combat abilities far beyond what their species profile indicated. This suggests either genetic modification or systematic deception about human capabilities." More murmurs filled the EU chamber, and Amy could feel the mood turning against humanity. These powerful beings were afraid of her species, and fear often led to bad decisions. "The council recognizes General Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire," the speaker announced. The general stood up slowly, his massive frame commanding attention from every being in the chamber. "Honored speaker, I was present during the incident under discussion. I was, in fact, the one who struck Dr. Carter." The chamber fell completely silent. Amy could see surprise on many alien faces as the general continued. "I struck her because I believed humans were weak, insignificant creatures who deserved no respect. I was wrong about that, but not in the way you think." General Vextar activated a holographic display that showed technical readouts and charts. "Yes, Dr. Carter defeated me in combat, but she did so using only basic self-defense techniques that any human can learn. There was no genetic modification, no secret training, no deception. She simply used abilities that her species has always possessed." Counselor Thresh made a wet gurgling sound. "You admit that humans are more dangerous than they appear?" "I admit that humans are more complex than any of us understood," General Vextar replied. "Dr. Carter knocked me down in 3 seconds, then immediately helped me to my feet. She showed both the ability to fight and the wisdom to show mercy. This is not the behavior of a warrior species or a threat to galactic peace." Amy watched as the general changed his display to show images of human settlements, research stations, and diplomatic missions. "In the 6 weeks since this incident, I have studied human civilization extensively," he continued. "They are indeed capable of violence when threatened, as any species must be to survive. But they prefer cooperation to conquest, exploration to exploitation, understanding to domination." Counselor Zix flickered more rapidly. Yet they spread across the galaxy at an unprecedented rate. They establish colonies on dozens of worlds. They make contact with species after species. This could be the beginning of an invasion. General Vextar's 4 eyes focused on the energy being. Or it could be the beginning of the greatest period of cooperation our galaxy has ever seen. Humans do not conquer the worlds they visit. They study them, learn from them, and invite others to share in their discoveries. Amy felt a tap on her shoulder and looked up to see Commander Morrison nodding toward the speaker. "Dr. Carter," the speaker said, "as the human at the center of this controversy, you may address the council." Amy stood on shaking legs and looked around the vast chamber. Hundreds of alien beings stared down at her, waiting to hear what she had to say. The future of her species might depend on the next few minutes. "Honored speaker, respected counselors," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. The chamber's amplification system carried her words to every corner of the room. "I am not a soldier or a diplomat or a politician. I am a scientist who studies plants. 6 weeks ago, I made a mistake at a dinner party and spilled some nectar. General Vextar struck me and I defended myself. That is all that happened." Amy touched the faint scars on her cheek as she continued. "But I understand why that simple incident has caused so much concern. You look at humans and see something that doesn't make sense. We appear weak, but we can fight when we need to. We seem peaceful, but our history is full of wars. We claim to want friendship, but we expand rapidly across the galaxy." She paused and looked directly at Counselor Thresh. "You are right to be confused by us because humans are a contradiction. We are capable of great violence and great kindness, often at the same time. We can be incredibly stubborn and incredibly adaptable. We are individuals who somehow manage to work together." Amy activated her own holographic display, showing images of Earth and human colonies. "But I want you to understand something important about my species. We do not seek to conquer the galaxy. We seek to understand it. Every world we visit, every species we meet, every discovery we make, we share with others freely." Counselor Zix pulsed brighter. "And if other species threaten you, if they attack your colonies or harm your people?" Amy looked at General Vextar, then back at the energy being. "Then we will defend ourselves, just as I did 6 weeks ago. But when the fight is over, we will offer our hand to help our former enemies stand up, just as I did with the general." The chamber erupted in noise as dozens of species began talking at once. Amy could hear arguments breaking out in languages she didn't recognize. Some beings seemed convinced by her words, while others appeared more frightened than before. The speaker's electromagnetic voice cut through the chaos. "The council will now vote on the human question. The options are full acceptance into galactic society, restricted expansion with monitoring, or quarantine until further study can be completed." Amy held her breath as the vote was tallied. Lights appeared on the chamber walls, showing the decision of each council member. Green for acceptance, yellow for restrictions, red for quarantine. The voting seemed to take forever. Amy watched as the lights flickered and changed, some counselors apparently changing their minds at the last moment. General Vextar stood beside her, his 4 hands clenched into fists. Finally, the speaker announced the results. By a margin of 3 votes, the council accepts humanity as a full member of galactic society, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. Amy felt her legs give out and had to grab the table for support. Around the chamber, some beings were celebrating while others looked disappointed or angry. The vote had been closer than she had hoped, but humanity had won. General Vextar placed one of his massive hands on Amy's shoulder. "Dr. Carter," he said quietly, "I believe this is the beginning of something extraordinary." Amy looked up at the alien who had become her unlikely ally. "What happens now?" "Now," the general said, "we learn what humans and Zephyrians can accomplish when we work together instead of fighting each other." 6 months later, Amy stood on the observation deck of the new joint Human-Zephyrian research station orbiting a distant star. She was no longer just a botanist studying alien plants. She was the first director of interspecies cooperation, a position created specifically for her after the council meeting. Through the window, she could see human and Zephyrian ships working together to explore an ancient alien artifact that neither species could have studied alone. Other alien vessels had joined them, drawn by the promise of shared knowledge and mutual benefit. Amy touched the scars on her cheek, now barely visible but still there. 3 seconds of violence had somehow led to the greatest alliance in galactic history. She still couldn't quite believe it. General Vextar approached from across the deck carrying 2 cups of coffee, a human drink he had developed a taste for. "Dr. Carter," he said, "the morning reports are in. 5 more species have requested to join our research alliance." Amy accepted the coffee and smiled. "Any word from the unknown ships we detected last week?" "Still no response to our communications," the general said. "But they continue to scan our activities from a distance. I believe they are studying us just as we once studied each other." Amy nodded and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, new species were watching humanity and its growing alliance of friends. They were probably trying to decide whether humans were a threat or an opportunity. "When they finally make contact," Amy said, "I hope they remember that the strongest partnerships often begin with misunderstandings.